without further ado, I want to introduce first and foremost the people that have made today possible, which is our great panel, and thank them all for making the time. And I'll start with Roberta. Roberta Duarte, who is the head of HR for Maersk in Asia Pacific. She has had a very eclectic background. She's worked for many years in the financial world, actually, in Citibank, and then transitioned to Maersk, where she was head of HR in Latin America at first, and for the past 4 years, she's been overseeing the fastest and most dynamic region, Asia Pacific. Roberta, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you, Radu. It's a pleasure to be here amongst friends and HR colleagues. Thank you.
Super. And then secondly, we have Matt. So Matt Burns is joining us all the way from Canada. So it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have him. It's 8 p.m. for him. I think you're close to Vancouver, right, Matt? You were saying that you're somewhere not too far.
That's right, close to Vancouver.
Yes. And Matt is a global consultant and thought leader when it comes to HR innovation, digital transformation in HR. He sits on many HR startup boards. He also runs global HR programs. And in his past corporate life, he worked as an HR director for several big retail and e-commerce companies, including Walmart. So Matt, thanks a lot for making the time and joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.
And our third guest is Amit Singh, who is the head of HR for Asia and Japan for AXA Investment Managers, which is the investment division of AXA Group. In some ways, he has mirrored Roberta's experience because he was first with DHL. So, 10 years in DHL, Amit, you've done a multitude of roles there across the HR department, and then you joined AXA about 4 or 5 years ago, and now leading the region. So Amit, thanks a lot for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
Super. So I wanted to kind of kickstart, and I can see that there's more and more people joining, which is great. And start with the current reality of today when it comes to this COVID-19 situation and working from home, and how are your organizations currently coping with it, and what were some of the main challenges that you were faced with? So maybe let's start with Roberta and tell us a little bit about Maersk, how Maersk dealt with it, and where you are today.
Yeah. Thank you, Radu, for this question. And I think the first and foremost is that we were first among equals, if you will, in this journey, right? Asia Pac was leading the way on finding out solutions, how to deal with this unprecedented crisis. And I think that's already a big learning journey, if you will. I think the first thing was how, quick we were able, fortunately, to get our BCP, our continuity plans, our business continuity plans, and shape and form and launch that. Firstly, in the Greater China area, right? That was the first impacted, but then along the way adapted to the other regions, not only to Asia, but to the other regions. And within that, I think the most important thing was driving this process purposely, meaning we knew very, very much that the most important thing for us was our employees. And we put that in the center of any decisions. And we went with a very firm and continuous communication process from multi-channel way, saying if you don't know what to do, the first thing is our employee safety and the care for yourself and for others. Our customers, continue serving our customers, and our responsibility towards our society. Because if we stop operating as Maersk, the impact is huge in everybody's lives. So these were the three things. In doubt, go back to these three things. And I think that has given us such a great, response, both from our employees that continue to be completely focused, committed, and taking care of themselves and each other. Our customers that kept giving us, business and more business of those that could, and also the response from society where we are able to serve masks and medical devices around the world. So that's a little bit in general terms, our journey during during this the beginning and during this crisis up to now. And we just released our financial results for the first quarter is positive for Maersk, despite the fact that we had, of course, a drop in volumes, both in the ocean side of the business as well as the logistics and services. So this is a little bit my response. The biggest learning, I think, is really putting the employees first. This is driven by values in our case, and it really the response is amazing.
And Matt, from your experience, I'll shift a little, because you've dealt with and you're dealing as a consultant. You can see different perspectives, and you've dealt with many different clients in this period. What have you seen as some of the major challenges that they've had to face? Some of them are obvious, right? All of a sudden, your workforce is not in the offices, at home, and tell us a little bit, how they cope with it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this is a strange experience for me in particular. My previous time as a CHRO really gave me line of sight to some of the challenges that were being faced in organizations. So as I spoke with people around the world and got feedback from folks from Latin America and Asia Pacific and Europe and certainly North America, I heard many of the same problems, but the approaches to how to deal with them were very different depending on the region and the organization. I think one thing that stood out for me amongst all of the incredible learnings that we've had in this period of time is that we didn't figure out pacing very well in most organizations. What I mean by that is, once we understood that there was not a business as usual type activity in front of us, a lot of people started sprinting towards trying to solve a problem. At least from our vantage point, we were originally led to believe that, this may be a course of weeks, that we may have disruption for a course of, several weeks, but there was never a conversation, at least initially, about several months. I think as that picture started to take shape, it certainly illuminated for many of our clients that maybe they perhaps were taking on too much in service of trying to do their existing jobs pre-pandemic along with the pandemic response. What we were seeing by about week 8 or week 10 was some people were starting to burn out. Many of our leaders that we work with, of course, have concerns and considerations and responsibilities outside of the workplace. They have families at home. They're multi-generational in a lot of cases. They may have family or friends who are on the front lines and impacted directly by the actual pandemic itself. So they have other considerations besides showing up to work in a conscious way. So we were really cautious about encouraging people to treat this in a rotational way, that as a leader, you have to show up and look after yourself first. So it's that airline, that mentality of apply the oxygen mask to yourself first before applying it to other people. And as a leader, your impact is so much broader. So, taking time for yourself, whether it's a 5-minute walk or a half an hour dinner with your family, is actually in service to the other people around you, because the effects are second and third degree connection. So that was a big learning for us when we started to reframe for folks that it was no longer weeks, but months. We started to see a bit of a relaxing, if you will, a little bit less urgency, and of a transition from leadership from more of that command and control style into more of a business as usual continuity approach, which I think ultimately is going to have to win out. Command and control is really, really effective in times of crisis, in times of emergency, but it's not sustainable over the long term. It just burns people out and burns organizations out too fast. So it was helping people realize when they could make that transition.
And Amit, curious to hear your perspective, from the, obviously also it's a different industry, the financial world. But again, it's a highly interactive industry. We were chatting before we started going online about the water cooler chats. So it's a different dynamic in which people interact with each other. And all of a sudden now everybody was sent, or a few months ago, everybody was sent home. How was that for you at AXA?
So I think firstly, I would like to echo what the other panelists have just said, and I'll try not to repeat because their points are great. The few additional challenges that we saw was the absence of separation between work and life. And it's interesting how on a daily basis, we used to, when things were normal, we used to complain about the routine. And now the importance of routine really became evident. So a lot of our efforts were really educating managers and also sending communications to employees as to how to actually plan their day, which seems very basic, but it was actually very important. The other challenge, and that's something I actually don't have an answer to, is the positive side of this remote working was that it leveled the playing field. We have a number of remote offices. We sometimes have hubs with 2 or 3 people. With everyone working remotely and having Zoom calls, etc., basically it was a level playing field. You actually had humans in front of you who you were interacting with. It wasn't a name in an email. It wasn't a voice in a conference call. So it humanized everything and leveled the playing field, gave everyone the visibility. But what we were missing were those informal interactions, because a lot of idea generation, a lot of learning happens through those informal water cooler conversations that you have in the company. So I guess a key challenge for us, and I don't have an answer right now, would be how do we balance the benefits that we saw with all these remote working and with the benefits that are there in the physical time people spend together.
And that actually brings me to the question that I had prepared, and I don't know. I mean, I think we are all figuring it out. What's that balance? But to your point, Amit, I wanted to ask, and maybe we'll shift back to Roberta and see, Roberta, do you have some concrete case studies and examples of how you managed to keep that communication flowing well between employees, that all of a sudden, and I'm talking mostly about the office staff here, because obviously Maersk also has people in the ports and people on ships and so on, but I guess more for the office staff that all of a sudden found themselves at home, not seeing each other. How did you keep that communication flow going? How did you keep that, open information sharing?
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, Radu, the first thing is, have and explore multiple channels, right, of communication, because there will be people that will be more comfortable with video calls. We have our own internal, we use Microsoft Teams for that. And with video, the other one is, WeChat, WhatsApp. The other ones is our own Yammer, which is an internal social media platform, and that has completely catapulted it to a different level. All in all, we did create campaigns around that. So we created a support each other campaign, for example, and that was co-created with the employees themselves. So inviting the employees and asking them what would work for them through quick, sprint projects and surveys, it really helped us to shape the communication channels to their likes, to their taste, and the multiple tastes and likes that we have within our company, right? Generational wise, culture wise, across our region, and then across the company. We were, as I said, we were taking the lead because we were faced with the situation faster. But I think that's the answer, like multiple channels. We were recommending from the CEO to all layers of the organization, recommending keep in touch as much as you can, checking as much as you can. We had actually fortunately started with a checking approach about 1.5 years ago with all our employees, where you don't connect just to talk about business, but you spend a few minutes talking about how are you today. And I think that was taken completely to the other level and as I think Amit said, when we are mixing our homes to our profession and our profession to our homes, right? So it became more humanized, definitely, and multiple means of communication with our employees using our Maersk operating system that never finished. So in the past, we used to have weekly connects. These weekly connects, instead of being now physically, they would done, virtually, right? So all the Maersk operating system that we have in place continued, and plus, so communication much bigger, took a much bigger agenda, if you will.
And I guess by now we are all very much used to also those type of virtual drinks sessions.
Yes, happy hours.
We've all seen happy hours, and we've seen a number of such events, and we keep seeing them also on LinkedIn. So I guess as human beings, we are fast to adapt. and at the same time, hopefully because there's some things that you can't replace. Matt, in terms of on your side, I wanted to ask you the question: how do you see overall, and you've kind of switched different perspectives from from an HR professional yourself, now from a consulting perspective. How do you see the role of HR in such a situation where it's a crisis mode, right? Where all of a sudden the world is upside down, and how do you see the HR as an enabler and as a key function to the business?
Yeah, it's a tough question because I think there's stages to the question. So I think if we assume that we're through the triage phase of what we're going through in the majority of jurisdictions, there's a level of taking stock on what just happened. We have to go back and make sure that we, in our rush to get to this point, have the right processes in place, have the right practices in place so that we can build upon those foundational elements. I think that's part of it. I think as we look forward, I think we've already begun this path. It started many years ago. I think we've accelerated a path towards digital transformation, a path towards HR being the architects of organizational performance. So I see that continuing to move in a more aggressive fashion. And I think it's HR stepping into the role we should have been playing all along, which is in a lot of cases, we've been strung up in a situation where we're focused on compliance or administration and risk mitigation. And I understand all those elements. That was certainly a key part of the roles that I was in. But those were the types of things that we sought to automate as fast as possible to be able to ensure that we put the right resources against the right kinds of work. We can use technology to automate and certainly use AI and other solutions to be able to redeploy finite resources towards things where human beings still have a significant competitive advantage. And that's building teams, that's creativity, that's judgment. So we're looking for opportunities in how do we, as HR, look at the organization, decide what work needs, who's doing the work, how teams are comprised, really in service to what's the fastest path to performance at the organizational, at the team, and at the individual level. And I think that's a different lens than let's try and avoid a lawsuit. Which has value, but it's not strategically focused and it's not forward-looking. And I really hope that among all the other changes that we see, whether it's a more humanized workplace or whether it's more acceptance of other people's perspectives, is that we see that HR becomes somebody that helps drive the agenda of a more human-centric workplace. I think we've gotten mistaken that profitability and people have to be at odds with one another. They don't. With intentionality, especially now with the tools we have, they can operate quite well and complement each other.
And I want to, Amit, I will ask you an elephant in the room, because I already see the question popping up twice in the chat, and I think it's a good time to ask that, and it's an important topic, and that topic is one of how do you also support from personal and mental, also the mental well-being of employees, because all of a sudden, and whether you talk about senior leaders that of course they need support themselves, or whether you talk about regular staff, but there are definitely problems that can occur in these situations of isolation and people working from home. And I wanted to ask for your thoughts. I'm putting you a little bit on the spot. We have not prepared this question. I haven't sent it to you, but how can you kind of attend to that well-being of the staff whilst doing this remotely?
I think it's a very good question, and I'm not surprised that people are asking that question. Before I answer that question, I think it's important to realize that everyone would be anxious. And it is good to accept it in the very beginning that we are in the middle of a pandemic. People have been thrown into multiple job roles. They are teachers, homekeepers, doing their jobs. It is a very anxious time. And what works best is to have empathy. And when I say empathy, people, and this is what we've tried to inculcate the culture within our company, is that people are not voluntarily deciding to just sit at home and work from there. We're in the middle of a crisis where people have been locked up at home and they're doing their best to meet client needs. So that acknowledgement needs to be there, that level of empathy needs to be there. And for things to work, for people to have less anxiety from work, you need to trust and empower at a ground level. And I mean, who is the best judge about their own personal health situation? It's the employee. They know if they've got underlying health conditions. They know what risk they want to take, what they're not comfortable with. Make make it voluntary for employees to actually say no to things. If they do not want to be stationed somewhere, for example, they should be able to say no. Managers should be aware, and managers should be mandated to have regular check-ins where such things can be raised. That is extremely important in managing the anxiety levels in any organization. One thing that, because we were talking about the role of HR, and I think it's very important, speaking to a lot of HR colleagues, I realized that organizations that were doing well in this crisis were the ones that had a central multifunctional team that was looking at this crisis. So this means people from HR, this means people from sales, client-facing people, it meant facilities, communication, everyone coming together. What it ensures is that you get different perspectives and you're able to communicate to the employees that there is this committee that is constantly looking at it and on a regular and timely basis passing on that communication. And that communication may mean that we do not have all the answers, which we still don't, but it at least gives people that someone's watching over what's going on and they're safe.
And it does remind me, and I want to share that example. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I've seen it at a very good from a political perspective. There were two leaders in this world that I've seen them do. Maybe there's more, but there's the ones that I have seen and I heard of. And I think it applies in different ways, but in the same way in organizations. So one of them was the Prime Minister of Finland, I think. Finland or Norway, Norway. And the other one was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And both are, again, both are women, so maybe empathy, for sure there's some traits that go better with women. And they had an incredible, so the one in Norway, she went on public television and told kids, and of course with kids also their parents, that look, it's normal to feel anxious, and this is absolutely normal during this time. And I think Jacinda in New Zealand also read some stories. Yeah, and she declared the Easter Bunny as a emergency or essential worker. I think the Easter Bunny was essential worker together with one other profession. So I found that to be quite. I mean, it's a relevant action taken at that level. But I think such actions taken in organizations matter a lot, and in such times it's even more. Is even more important than in peacetime, if you may, or if we may use that analogy.
I would just add, Radu, it's not complicated, right? Like we're all, at the end of the day, we're all human beings. And when we talk about deploying empathy, it just means asking yourself, what might the other person need in the situation? So I'll give you another real simple example. In our business, we encourage all of our clients, and we did it ourselves, is we called our employees and said, hey, you're going to be okay. Like, your job is safe, you are safe. And in cases where we could provide that level of assurance, we made those calls proactively to have a conversation with them, because we knew they'd be asking those questions of themselves. Now, I appreciate not in all cases you can do that, but in cases that you can, it takes 5 minutes to have a conversation. And in nearly every single case, people came back to us and said, just thank you. It was one less thing to worry about. As I was thinking about my children or my family or my spouse or other, money was one more thing I just didn't need to worry about. So I think the empathy piece comes into play when we just put ourselves in other people's shoes and try and be human.
Mm-hmm. And I actually
agree.
Yes, go
sorry.
Roberta. I was going to give you the floor, because
Go ahead. Go ahead.
There is just a chat. I wanted to give you this anchor. There is Farzana who shared about leaders being vulnerable in the chat, and she makes a great point. And I also know, and we shared before in MERS, that you organized even before this crisis, and I'm pretty sure that you've done it during the crisis as well, the leaders sharing openly with employees there and being vulnerable. So I actually wanted to encourage you, if you want to share along those lines.
Yes. So that was actually very, very aligned to what I was about to say, right? Is on empathy, it's also sharing your own vulnerabilities, right? And we have started that journey in Maersk a while ago to invite our leaders through these check-ins that we started more than almost 2 years now, where you come before you start any important meeting or connection, that you say, how are you? But you mean it. How are you, right? No, how are you? Let's talk about business. How are you? And be there and tell how are you? How we truly are. And we started that. So during this phase of COVID, that came very handy, to be quite honest with you. So leaders through panels, through their own check-ins with their colleagues or town halls, they would come forward and say, you know, this is very hard for me. And I'm also, you know, going through my own pains of juggling multiple jobs, as Amit said, right? I'm having to take care of my family members and my and business crisis and customers calling and you know, worried about their own goods being transported and all that. And that has come a long way in terms of becoming more of a community altogether going through this, right? The other thing that we leveraged a lot in terms of well-being for our employees, we quickly understood that for many people, at least in Maersk, that was their first time working remotely, both leaders in different levels and employees. So that was a big portion of stress for them. And so we quickly were able to identify that with them and created learning, you know, tools for them to be able, okay, how can you become more effective, you know, leading remotely or working remotely? Balancing, you know, and we created communities of exchange by topic of interest. And that was a very big one. The other one we leveraged a lot was our employee assistance program in partnership with CompSite. And they had come forward with a variety of webinars on, you know, mental wellness. So we leveraged that from the get-go since early February. And that has, you know, the amount of colleagues across you know, really joining these webinars were fantastic. And lately, what we are doing is also inviting more and more the employees and their kids and their family members to these webinars. So not restraining ourselves just for the employees. Since everything is a mix now anyway, why not extend these tools to the whole entire family? So that's some of the things we have been doing here.
That's great. Though I do hope that my kids will not barge in, because then we'll have a problem. But
my ends always come. So
and I wanted to switch to Amit and ask you the question for the future, right? So this crisis and what do you think it will bring in what we call the future of work? Will we see more flexible home-based work from home arrangements? Will we see other changes in terms of how we interact? What do you think? What's coming? Or what's already here as well?
So definitely there will be changes. So things won't be the same moving forward. But before I start, like I think COVID is not the change maker. It's definitely the accelerator. It's not the change maker. So, for example, like Zoom, it's not that Zoom was invented during this time. Zoom always existed. Its uptake has increased because of the crisis. So the need for change always existed. The need for flexible working, for remote working was always there, whether it was from working parents or from younger generation, or from caretakers. And that need, basically, in a way, this crisis made companies suddenly change and be able to work remotely and deliver to their customers. Now that we know it is possible in most cases, there would be a greater push towards moving towards those flexible and remote working policies and guidelines. So that's definitely changing. And I think even if you take remote working, how it actually was launched as an ad hoc measure. The government forced a lot of companies to say, just go and work remotely. But now when the lockdowns are being eased, that same remote working is a central piece to your business continuity, because people would start coming back to work in a staggered split team arrangements, which means part of your workforce would still be working remotely. So it's actually a very central piece of business continuity. And again, the role of HR would be immense in how to support that transition. The more broader question would be that with all these flexible arrangements, what other changes would come in? Would we start measuring performance and behaviors differently? as an example, would we be looking more at output as opposed to time people spend at work? So all those changes would definitely flow in.
That's a great point, and I'd like to ask Matt, because also you interact a lot with this, a lot of startups, a lot of new innovations and systems and automation and all of that in HR. So I wanted to see what you think, maybe to give us some examples. I know that you've been involved in some projects also around digitalization in HR, and tell us a little bit about how you think the future work will look like.
Yeah, first, I agree with what Amit's saying. I think COVID is the accelerator for changes that have long been overdue. I think most organizations, if you ask them, privately, they would tell you that they've underfunded workplace infrastructure because there was no impetus to make the investment. And now there suddenly are resources available to look at things like business continuity and risk mitigation. I'm hearing more conversations around predictive analytics than I've heard in my entire life in the last 8 weeks, because people are trying to avoid future risk by using the information that occurred in the past. I think the companies that I've spoken with are really focusing in on a few factors. Business continuity, of course, is one. Another one is, how is a workforce going to be comprised going forward, and how do you create an elasticity with your workforce so that you're able to respond to market conditions more quickly? So that could look like a transformation from the traditional full-time equivalent model, where we based it on, people 9 to 5 sitting in office chairs, to more project-based teams, better leveraging the gig-based economy or freelancers or contractors. I think as skills become more specialized and more highly specialized in certain areas, we're going to see a greater acceptance to be able to augment existing teams with other skill sets along the way for finite periods of time. If for no other reason, then it's very expensive to carry those resources over an elongated period of time, and it limits your flexibility if things do see a downturn or a rapid acceleration. You want to be able to have flexibility when it comes to resources. I see the same thing happening, by the way, when it comes to technology. People are less inclined to want to sign longer term committed contracts with single source enterprise vendors. They're looking for more flexibility with SaaS solutions, where it's month to month, where you can continually adjust your service based on the needs of your business. And it's becoming much more of a service orientation to that. And then finally, what I would say is I'm just seeing much more people. Well, our biggest competition, if you will, towards digital transformation was inertia. It's easier to do nothing than to do a very complex, large project. And now that simply isn't an option anymore. So what we're doing is helping people digest what is a very big change and think about all the broader implications, because any successful digital transformation blends 4 things: strategy, technology, analytics, and processes. And if you miss any one of those 4 pieces, you're ultimately going to have to repair it down the road anyway. So we're helping people connect those pieces in some sort of integrated way that makes sense for them, but is also customized around their unique challenges. I think that's just so important now, is that people understand that we need to have the flexibility and the adaptability within organizations, within regions, within business segments, because that's what's required now to be forward and be successful.
And regarding skills, Roberta, we got this question, and looking ahead for the next years, do you think leaders will need to develop some new skills, or maybe to exercise like muscles, right? Some existing skills, or and again, this is going to be mostly related to soft skills, not the hard skills. And what would those be?
So I will now resonate with my colleagues here, right? I think that what is going to continue to be necessary, and it's being accelerated during this process, is the ability to change fast, right? So, and to lead change. And I like this, the move from change management to change enablement. I think this is a big topic for all of us in the room. HR leaders, business, all the other business leaders, the employees, right? Instead of just managing the change that comes to you, how do you enable this continued change? Because it will either be provoked and by the company that is transforming. All companies and industries are transforming, but also because of external events like what we just lived. Right? So I think this is a big one. The second big one is, I think, remote leadership and management. And I think we are still learning how to do this well. To the point of Amit, we will now live with a new way of working, which will be composed of as also Matt said, people that are probably not direct staff. So project teams that come and go, project employees that are working from home more comfortably and happy doing that, employees that feel more comfortable working in the office, and will continue to choose that option, right, if it's available. So this remote leadership and managing different types of work styles, I think, will be very, very, very important in the new thing. And I was just yesterday, on the day before, I was visiting another webinar, participating in another webinar, and there were some things that this lady shared that I thought it was really, really powerful. She said, before the crisis, they ran a survey in multiple locations, and what people would like more related to work was remote, right? Flexibility to work, a collaborative environment, and very innovative environment. And this whole process has only shown us that these three things became very, very, very key, right? We are being very creative to deal with this in different forms, and employees are enjoying doing that. They are much more flexible in there are employees that join later in the day because they have to attend to their kids early in the morning, and they continue to be very, very productive. And the collaboration has gone to a completely different level because of the humanization of the situation, as Amit has said. So I think collaboration and being able to be collaborative will be more and more and more key to the success of any colleagues out there. And of course, I invite my colleagues to add.
Yes, and Amit, very specifically on one of the points that Roberta mentioned, and you have also the reality that business goes on, whether you're in lockdown or you're not in lockdown, so people are still onboarded. How do you do, and I don't know if you've had direct experience or you've seen, but what happens now in this process where you need to onboard people and all of a sudden, you're basically stuck at home? Are there certain tools that you can use better than others? What's your thoughts around this?
So onboarding's been a difficult challenge for us because in our company, at least when it comes to hiring new people, that face-to-face interaction and getting to know people was extremely important. When we select people, like a lot is based around that chemistry that you feel when you meet people. So it was a very different experience for us to move quickly to everything being virtual. So obviously tools like Zoom really help, but it still doesn't give the same feeling. So we were able to onboard people. We were able to send things to their homes to get them onboarded quickly. All that could work out, but at the back of everyone's mind, both the people manager who's onboarding an employee as well as the employee, was this desire to really feel the workplace. That's what we found. So that was a challenge that we couldn't resolve. And as slowly the lockdowns coming, being slowly removed, we can see that people, especially the new people who join, they do want to come to the workplace, get to know the colleagues, have those interactions, and fit into the organization. So at least for us, moving forward, we'll have to see how we balance those benefits of what we can do remotely, but also to ensure that people feel connected. Those informal conversations still continue to happen.
We got a very good question from one of the audience, and Matt, I will address it to you. Also, what has happened with this remote work is that micromanagement is very hard to do. So if you are a micromanager, I think that they hate this situation because they can't really breathe down anybody's necks anymore because it's very difficult to do.
Well, you can track your screen time.
You can try, but it adds a new dimension. And there is the reality, and also culturally now some of us sit in Asia. So in Asia, maybe more in some countries than others, and the rest of the world, you have that command control type of decision making. Do you see this also shifting a little bit? I mean, a little bit or a lot, because all of a sudden people are alone. They need to make decisions. They need to be empowered for good or for bad, but you have no choice. How do you see this playing out, Matt?
Yeah, the earlier comment from the panel was perfect in that we're moving from a situation where we're going from a manufacturing economy into a knowledge-based economy, and outputs are far more important than inputs. Back in the days of the factories, we could measure who was producing more widgets and assign a productivity measure very easily, as you could see the tangible outputs of effort. But now we're in a knowledge economy where there's a clear need to serve, and therefore competitiveness. And we have to look at that as an organization and ask ourselves, is our efforts better spent trying to control and micromanage people and oversee their work? Or do we give them the tools to be able to succeed and trust them to do a good job for that? And I think that studies have consistently shown that in a knowledge-based economy, you have declining returns when you apply micromanagement to not thought-based workers. So we have to move that way out of necessity. I think, again, this pandemic has accelerated a movement that was already well underway. And I'm looking forward to a world where we can focus more on creating conditions for success and less time managing adults that, I don't know about you, but most people I know come to work every single day and want to do a good job and want to provide for their families, and they want to put in an honest day's effort. We shouldn't manage the majority because a select few people don't have that same mentality.
Mm-hmm. And Roberta, I will ask you a challenging question because Maersk, big company, big structure, right? So whilst I guess all of us in principle, and I agree, Matt agrees, all of us probably agree with the idea that let's measure outputs versus, how much time you spend and so on. When you deal, for example, with Maersk, because you happen to be working for Maersk, right? But there's a lot of big companies out there. Yeah. That's not necessarily easy to do, is it? Because then you have to give that impression of, no, it's not an impression. You need to be fair, right? And then you also need to explain to X employee versus Y employee why he or she gets promoted versus the other one, and all of that. Do you have some thoughts in terms of how can this be practically implemented in this big structures of organizations? Because I'm not talking about the Twitters and the Facebooks and the Google, which they can be wacky, right? Because they have the high margins and all of that as well. How would you do it in a company like Maersk?
In terms of measuring outputs, that's your question?
Yes, and in terms of making it more flexible, right? Also in terms of when you work, how you work, you're already doing it, but yeah.
Yeah, I think first, there is no one size fit all approach to this, right? Even within, office-based workers and non-office-based workers, because what it may work for a group of people may not work for another group of people. And I think that is, so that's the first thing, right? What makes people productive normally is when they are very engaged and happy doing what they do, right? So there are people that it's probably going to continuously working from 5 to 9, going to the office and loving that. That's phenomenal in the office. There are others that will prefer to work, maybe 2-3 days from home and 2 days from office. There are people that will probably, decided to work part-time, and we have more job sharing type of scenarios. And that is applicable even to people who work in warehouses, right? And that they have now a lesser shift. So I think we will need to definitely look into these different needs of people, together with the different needs of the businesses and functions we have within every company, not only Maersk. Of course, for productivity in the warehouse, we will have a way of looking into output and outcome, very different than what we look into for example, an office-based function. But I do think that the performance management that we are all looking into, and that's global as well, and I think that's going to continuously accelerating, that is being changing tremendously. Also because of the advent of technology in places like our ships or our warehouses. So I do think, Radu, it's not an easy answer because it's not a single, a straightforward answer, but I think it will impact all sorts of employees, no matter where they are sitting. in some way, shape, or form. And trust will underpin the whole relationship at work, right? It needs to, cannot be, as we were saying, command and control anymore. So I don't know if I answered your question, but you know, giving you my humble view of this.
How about expats? A very good question for Amit. This one I will ask you. Obviously, this situation also creates the reality where people operate from virtually anywhere, or we're kind of learning to do that. Do you see expat positions even disappearing because pragmatically and practically it may or may not be needed anymore, or how do you see this thing?
It's an interesting question. I don't think the expat positions would be targeted because they are not needed. The reason companies pay much more to bring in an expat is precisely because those skills are needed. And sometimes those skills are just internal knowledge about the company that you need from one geography to another. So those needs are not going to change. You would still need that knowledge. I think a driving factor that would lead to less expats probably could be the fact that after this health crisis, we also have an economic crisis. So in my opinion, the only reason there'll be less expats in some companies would probably be an economic decision rather than a decision which is based on a lack of need.
Yes. And to this point where you need to balance a little bit, and I'll open it to all of you because it is $1 million question and it's very hard to do when you are in a situation as a business and you have the business leaders and obviously you have the HR side where you're all part of. As the CEO, you need to manage cost versus the well-being of your employees, and sometimes it's not necessarily conflicting, as Matt said, but sometimes, you know, depending on how you look at it. So in these situations, I wanted to open it up to you and see a lot of companies will end up making people redundant. I mean, it's just a fact of any sort of economic downturn that we are already in and we will face in the next months. What's your thoughts in how to best balance it and how to do it right? Can you even reallocate certain resources in different parts of the business just to make sure that you're not firing people ultimately, or what other solutions are there, I guess, to talk about the elephant in the room, how basically to avoid firing people or letting people go? Amit, you want to start?
Why not? I'm glad you're addressing this question, and I do want to bring it up front that, like I said, we were in a health crisis. It's led to an economic crisis right now. We don't know what the recovery would look like. I'm not an expert. The economists are saying L-shaped, V-shaped, U-shaped. So we don't know how this would pan out. But what we do know is that each time there's an economic crisis, there's a correction. And when I say correction, it means that there would be certain businesses that would not survive. And yes, there would be job losses. So we need to accept that fact. We're already seeing unemployment rates. And so we cannot deny that it is not going to happen. Now, what individually companies can do would basically vary. For a few companies, obviously, just the solutions that were being discussed here. Remote working would probably make businesses question why are they paying such high rents for their office space, which is underutilized. Another thing that also was mentioned in the panel was around decrease in travel. Now, decrease in travel would consequently mean lesser cost for a company. Now, that these two points could easily be applied in company A, but think of it if you're an airline, or if you're a business hotel, or if you're a real estate owner, you also have employees. And so we're in an interconnected world. We could cost cut in our own companies. It is going to have an impact somewhere else in the economy. So that job loss would happen. And I think what companies need to focus on is that if they do face that situation, primary importance is treat your employees fairly and with respect. And be open to the people who've lost their jobs, because still a lot of traditional minded companies, if you've lost your job, it could be just because of redundancy. There's a feeling that there must be something in the background that this person lost the job. That culture needs to go away. We need to know that people would lose jobs, and we need to be open to it. We need to be open to accepting people who've lost jobs as well.
Thank you. Roberta, Matt, do you want to add?
I cannot say better than Amit. It was beautifully said, to be quite honest with you. And I like particularly what you said, Amit, on, it will continue happening. I don't think it's going to happen just because of this situation. We have had along the history, right, many moments of companies' transformation or company or crisis out there that we had to face. And I think that the most important thing that we deal with as leaders of HR and business leaders, we all are, is to do any time that we need to face this situation, to do it with respect, with care, and considering the whole context that is happening in our surroundings, right? And also our responsibility to society. So are we really helping the society by going through these massive layoffs, right? What is going to be the flip side of the impact? So I think these discussions are definitely happening in several industries right now that I know of, and that I think is very responsible. So because there will be also a rebound. So what are other options we can take as companies before we tap to this solution, right? In terms of managing costs. And I think I see a much more responsible and caring and respectful way of looking into this, at least through this crisis. I have passed through the financial crisis before as well as an HR leader, and I see a big difference on how everyone is dealing with this and looking into alternatives, reduced working hours according to the volumes and all these type of things, job sharing, and the ones that we already have discussed, right? Going on holidays, using your vacation, so that we don't continuously increasing that liability. So there are many things we can all use. And again, I think involving employees along the way is the key, and being truthful. What is going on? What is happening? Where are we? And in terms of our business results. And I think the companies that are dealing with this situation or other situations that I have seen, they were successful because of this transparency and respect along the way.
Very well said.
I would just add to that. I think it's been said beautifully in a couple different ways, and I'll try and say something that's equally intelligent. But I think we talked about transparency and respect and empathy a lot in this entire conversation. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that is really representative of a tough situation. People have a broader understanding of where we are economically. This is the largest economic event of our lifetimes. And I think people have a greater understanding that there's going to be consequences. There have been consequences to that. There will be consequences for that. But I think what people want from their organizations, at least what I would want from my organization, is that the organization and its leaders stand up and take ownership of the decision. So there's going to be tough decisions to make, own it, and be transparent and be respectful about those tough decisions. Give your existing employees and the ones that remain assurances that you treated the people that left with respect. If I hear one more message about a recorded Zoom call to fire somebody, no, you don't have to do that, right? Like, I get it. It's efficient. It's a legal issue, but we can treat people well and with respect, and we can do things the right way in any circumstance. And this is no different. I guess I have a distinction, if you will, of having been in organizations and architected large, massive restructuring projects involving hundreds, if not thousands of people. It was never a conversation about how is it most efficient for us as a project team, and always about what would be the best thing for the people who are impacted by the activity? Because ultimately, the people that remain in the organization will look to that example of how you treated them and ask themselves, do they want to be in a similar situation down the road as employees? I think that's so critical. And I think the last piece is, if I'm in an organization, I want to know that the company has a clear path forward, at least directionally. Tell us where you're going. Tell us how we can help support you get you there. We're all feeling a little bit of anxiety around the broader economic implications. tell me how I can help us and help our circumstances by all pulling on the same rope. And I think companies that do that and own the limitations of the information that they have are going to have the most success going forward.
And I'm just being cognizant of time. So we have about 5 minutes. So I'd like to invite everybody to maybe share some final thoughts or pieces of advice moving forward for each other, for the attendees, and you know, let's say, or also hopes for a better future. Let's start with Amit.
So I would say that if you look in the past, and the past 3 recessions that we've seen, they've all led to more automation. So with this downturn, with this health crisis, that is going to be even quicker. So that automation is going to be quicker. And my advice to everyone is to be agile, to ensure that you keep learning, you are open to technologies and how to use them, because that would be the key differentiator moving forward, how quickly you adapt to those changes, because the changes are definitely coming. That's the given.
Very well said. Roberta?
Yeah, I will leverage on something I think it was Matt who said, and I keep saying that to everyone here and Maersk as well, is that we need to take care of ourselves first, so we can take care of others, being peers, being you know, our teams as leaders we are, and also our leaders, right? But we needed to put the mask in terms of the metaphor with the airplane, right? First, so that we can put the mask into others later. So I think that is fundamental during and past COVID, that we learned this lesson. And I agree with Amit in the curiosity part, continuously being curious and learning during, post, pre-crisis, because, you know, this is going to be exponential in so many ways from a technology perspective that we don't know yet, right? What is going to be truly the future of work. So the only thing we can all do is be curious, learn as much as we can. We have an array of options these days, online options, books and online learnings that I think we can all benefit internally in our companies and externally. So definitely that, agree with Amit in this one.
Thank you, Roberta. Matt?
I love going last on questions like this because all the good answers are already taken. I'm teasing, of course. Kindness, empathy, transparency, agility, all important. I'll add one more to the mix, which is I think that constraints drive innovation. If you look at them differently and you look at them optimistically, I think we have some significant constraints ahead of us now in most organizations. And we have an opportunity to use those constraints ultimately to architect more human-centric workplaces. It's possible. I understand that it's hard to wrap your head around how to innovate in times of great constraints. It's possible to do that if you're thoughtful about how you have your resources and how you deploy them going forward, and you leverage things like technology and data in service to a more human-centric workplace.
And I will add my 2 cents to this. In the spirit of human innovation, I must say that this crisis, one of the few silver linings, at least for me, because I think I have a sense of humor, and I always like laughing. For me, the silver lining has been that with people being stuck at home, the amount of memes and creative jokes that have circulated on WhatsApp has been incredible. So that is, you know, that is a delight, because at least, you know, if you laugh, at least personally, it kind of helps me also think a little bit better and you know, get over the whatever cloud that we are in, or crisis that we're in, because ultimately everything is going to pass. So I think, you know, even in these times, that human humor and innovation and creativity has been happening. And yeah, hopefully it ends sooner rather than later, but for sure it will. And for sure we will see a lot of new ideas, new ways of working, ways of doing things. I saw also, and you might have seen in 2008, somebody made a statistic or put all the logos of the great companies that emerged in 2008 at the height of the economic crisis, financial crisis. You know, you have your Ubers, your, I don't know, there's a couple of Airbnb and whatnot. So we always figure it out, right? As a species, as human beings, we are wired like that. So on that positive note, I want to end this conversation and thank all the panelists for your honest and genuine contributions. I really appreciate that. And thank you all participants for your great questions. And yes, stay healthy, stay safe, and catch you all soon in person.
Thank you, Radu. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.